Welcome back, guys. Here we are again, another video lecture, this time using a different type of technology called Screencast-O-Matic. So this time, hopefully, things will be a lot easier as I will not be holding an iPad with a shaky hand trying to talk to you, click buttons, explain things, and this should facilitate things a little bit. I don't know. Let's see how it goes. You'll tell me. Probably on Friday, as Wednesday I will be out of class due to a high Q meet. So at any rate, Chapter 8, Section 1, we're back to the Progressive Era, turn of the century, that is 20th century, so the late 1890s into the early 1900s. In today's topic, we're going to deal with political corruption and industrial disorder. This is a wonderful political cartoon, and there are lots of them from this time period, so it really makes it kind of fun to study. And this appeared in the publication called Puck, itself a kind of funny name. But at any rate, you see some of the leading industrialists, capitalists, we might now term them robber barons after our common assessment, in the Senate gallery in Washington, D.C., in the Capitol building. And you can see that they're kind of looming large and dominating the Senate and the senators who are seated down below in their desks. And that was exactly the idea and the message of this political cartoon, was that the leading industrialists, capitalists, really did control politics and politicians in a way that was unfair, and they distorted the political process that's supposed to be free and fair. This led to political corruption and other disorders that we're going to look at in this lecture. So let's take a look at the basic idea. If I could get this to work, please. No, we want to go forward. There we go. So politicians and corruption. So the man that you see in this photograph is named George Washington Plunkett. He was a New York State assemblyman. So he didn't serve in the national government, but nonetheless, he kind of epitomizes the idea of the corrupt politician. And we're going to look at some of the things that he did. But at first, we need to define this idea, and that is political machines. Many politicians at local, that is city, state, and national levels, were corrupt. And by that, we mean that they provided favors to people in exchange for votes. And these politicians that provided favors, it could have been a bag of coal, it could have been some food, it could have been a few dollars, it could have been a job, it could have been rent forgiveness, any number of different types of favors. But at any rate, these politicians were the leaders of these political machines, and that is providing favors for votes. And that's what a political machine did. And you can see here in this political cartoon that a politician with a rather large hand and large thumb really kept everybody under his thumb at that time. So that corrupt politicians are using their office and power to keep people under their thumbs. And this is especially true in the cities, obviously East Coast cities in particular, where large numbers of immigrants arrived between 1880 and 1920, as we learned in a previous lecture. And a large number of African Americans were there, and these folks needed help. They needed money in many cases to pay rent, to buy food, clothing. And the politicians that were willing to corrupt themselves were willing to provide that help in return for votes. So moving on, we have the idea of ward boss. Now, political elections are held in districts. So each city, each state are divided up into political districts. And in each of these districts, there are elections. Each political district then also had a district boss or a ward boss who controlled the process of handing out jobs, contracts, and favors in return for votes. And if we go to New York City, the largest city in the East Coast, Tammany Hall was the most famous political machine, and really a shining example, if you will, of corruption. Now, it sounds kind of funny that we would say shining example. These are people that we would not admire necessarily for what they did. But New York City, being one of the larger cities with many, many districts, lots of factories and different types of jobs, was ripe for this type of political activity. And we already talked about this, that the machine worked by people asking the ward boss for a favor in return for votes. So moving forward, let's take a look at Jim Plunkett. You saw his picture earlier, again, a New York State representative, and he kind of epitomizes it. That is, he's an example of this idea of a machine. And here's what a journalist did. A journalist actually captured a day in the life of Jim Plunkett. So at 6 a.m., there was a fire. Plunkett followed the fire trucks to the building that burned down and found lots of people out on the street that were distressed. And he handed out food and clothing and provided other shelter for these people that had lost everything. Later in the morning, he paid rent for a 4 family and provided them with $1 so they could buy food. In the same morning, he found jobs for 4 unemployed fellows. That afternoon, he attended 2 funerals, one of a Jewish family and one of an Italian family, and then he took members out for drinks afterwards. In the evening, he undertook fundraising to help a church buy a new bell, and that same evening, he attended a wedding reception and gave a generous present to the bride, and at midnight, he actually went to bed. And in return for this, Plunkett really became a millionaire because in return for the votes and the favors he dispensed, he was able to be involved in various land deals. Cities would oftentimes set aside lands for parks. Plunkett would get word from city officials that the city of New York was going to build a park in a neighborhood. Plunkett would go buy the land from unsuspecting folks that had no idea that there was a park coming, and then he would turn around and sell that land to the city for outrageously inflated prices. This was how the political machine worked. So he was able to get insider information. Again, something today we would not admire. In fact, illegal today, probably illegal then, but the judicial system really turned a blind eye to this kind of activity. So Plunkett is able to really get rich. And who's paying for this? The public, who pays taxes. So again, that's kind of a corrupt system. All right, moving forward. Let's take a look at some of the industrial disorders of this time period. And we already dealt with the idea of trust, the oatmeal trust in the common assessment that we just completed. And in this case, we see a wonderful political cartoon again of depicting John Rockefeller's Standard Oil Trust. And you can see there in the middle, there's a big oil container. Maybe you've seen some of these in Philadelphia itself, down in the southern part of the city, down by the stadiums where there were refineries. But these big, large, cylindrical things that contained, thousands of gallons of oil. And you can see an octopus that looks rather menacing, and the 8 tentacles, arms kind of reaching out and grabbing up other oil producers. And this is what Rockefeller did when he created a trust. He created a monopoly and essentially controlled 90% of the U.S. petroleum market at one point. Now, this idea of trusts, as we said, business owners in the same industry getting together and conspiring and trusting one another not to reveal their secrets, was good in some cases, and we'll see that in a second, but there was also another problem that we can look at with the idea of trust, and it led to the growing concentration of both power and of wealth. And in 1896, you can see that the top 2% of Americans owned 10% of all the wealth. And by 1910, the top 2% owned 20% of the wealth. So in 14 years, that number doubled. And this is the problem of inequality. Remember that we read an article about Joseph Stiglitz, and we had that wonderful roundtable discussion talking about inequality in the United States. Well, this is, I think, proof that inequality was a problem, and it was something like the trusts and other methods used by the leading capitalist business people that kind of led to this unhealthy concentration of wealth in the hands of very, very few people. So moving forward, inequality of wealth, and we can look at mergers, that is companies doing the same business merging together, trusts, we had horizontal vertical integrations, and all these things really explain the rise and the rapid rise, I would say, in wealth inequality. Several men or one man controlled the entire industries, and this was bad for competition. So again, trust cause inequality of wealth. It also is bad for competition, which is supposed to be one of the bedrocks of our free market system. However, I did mention that there were benefits to consumers, and that came in the form of cheaper retail prices. And that was really due to the large volume and standardized production techniques that trusts were able to use. And that really meant the use of machines, labor-saving ideas, and cost-saving ideas. John F. Rockefeller, who pioneered the use of those little 5-gallon red cans for gasoline and other petroleum products, was able to save money by using less solder to create those cans. Now, it seems silly and insignificant, but using less solder, he was able to save $5 million a year. It's estimated $5 million a year in savings. So that is pretty incredible. So that led to lower prices. Now, that's good for consumers. However, again, the use of these machines to produce products was bad for workers because now workers didn't need as many skills. That meant that workers could be paid less, and especially in a time of great immigration, workers were really going to face hard times, and we saw that in Henry George's Progress and Poverty. So, 1900, creation of wealth was so easy. Well, it was for the businessmen and capitalists who did create the new products and sell them to American consumers at lower prices. However, the workers suffered. So, what we've already seen is that workers really did face difficult times, and many workers, in fact, could barely scrape by with food, shelter, and clothing costs taking up all of their income, leaving them with really no savings and really no way to get ahead in the great American economic engine. And so what we see here around 1900 is the birth of a more or less permanent kind of lower, or we might term it the working class, and they're at the bottom of society. And these most often immigrants coming from Southern and Eastern Europe. They were often poor, illiterate, dirty, and many suspected that they were then thus given to criminal activities, and they could not then be trusted to become good, law-abiding citizens in the United States. However, we're going to see then another class as we look at this title. America becomes a class-based society. So we had the wealthy industrialists, who were very few. We had the lower class, or the working class, which is much larger. We're also going to see the rise for the first time, really, of a serious middle class. And these guys were, and women, were professors, small merchant. They were teachers. They were lawyers. They were clergymen. They were clerks in these large companies. And they're going to occupy a middle ground between the wealthy elite and then the lower working classes. And I think this pyramid really does a nice job of sort of capturing what that class society begins to look like in the United States at that time. So I hope this was helpful, and we will come back and deal more with the idea of class in America. And we're really going to start to look at the middle class, because they felt that the upper class had its own problems and was not doing necessarily things that were good for America. The middle class also had concerns about the working class, and so that's going to lead to what we call the progressive movement and a series of reforms that's kind of exciting in American history.